You are a woman of faith. You lead, you serve, you show up with composure in rooms that require it and with grace in rooms that don't. You pray, you give, and you hold a standard for people who look at you. But there are thoughts that you've had, specific ones, about your work, about the people around you, that you have never said out loud to anyone. Not your closest friend, and certainly not in person. These are not sinful thoughts, but they feel like they don't belong to the version of you that you've built. The faithful version, the composed one, the one who has it all together. You've been quietly managing the gap between what you feel and who you're supposed to be. Today, that gap gets a name. Welcome back, Sophisticates. I'm Davina Dandridge. I'm an emotional empowerment strategist, and author of Brains and Baubles Do What Works for You, and creator of the Self Gut Check Method. I teach women how to recognize their emotions, think strategically, and make decisions they'll be proud of 5 years from now. What I want to do today is address something that senior women leaders who are also women of faith almost never get to talk about with any honesty: the interior experience of having thoughts and feelings that feel incompatible with your spiritual identity. You don't have sinful thoughts. That's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about the sophisticated ones, the complex ones, ones that carry resentment or grief or deep ambivalence about choices you've made and roles you've held. The kind of thoughts that make you feel, on some level, like a fraud because you know what you're supposed to believe, and some part of you is not fully there yet. This is not a theology lesson. It's not a substitute for your own faith or spiritual counsel. What this is an honest look at what emotional suppression does when it operates underneath a spiritual framework, and what becomes possible when you stop treating your interior life as something that needs to pass an inspection before you're allowed to bring it to God. This is for women at the director level or above who are spiritually grounded and who have never had a language for the emotional exhaustion of being both. Let me describe what I think is happening. You've built a public identity that is genuinely who you are. You are faithful. You are composed. You are the woman in the room that holds everything together. And that's real. That's not performance, or at least it didn't start out as performance. But somewhere along the way, the interior management became as rigorous as the external presentation. You started filtering your own thoughts before they could fully form. A feeling of resentment about a colleague or a decision would surface, and before you could breathe, it was already suppressed because resentment was not who you are. A thought about your life that carried real grief, about what you gave up, about what it has cost you to be dependable for everyone, that would begin to form, and you would just redirect it because gratitude is the posture. And gratitude is true. I talk about gratitude all the time. And you know that you have gratitude. You're not wrong about any of that. The gratitude is real, the faith is real, the composure that you've developed is earned. What is also real is the accumulation of the thoughts that didn't get to finish their sentence, the feelings that were redirected before they could deliver the information to you, the interior version of you that is feeling years of managed emotional content in the background, running things behind the version of yourself that shows up for everything and everyone else. There is a specific experience I want to name because I believe you have felt it and never had a word for it. And this is it. The moment you catch yourself thinking something that feels incompatible with who you are spiritually, instead of examining that thought or that feeling, you feel ashamed of it. And then what you do is you perform agreement with that belief that you're not currently experiencing. You present peace that you don't entirely have. You pray with a version of yourself that is smaller, nicer, and neater than the actual version of you. And that's the gap between your public spiritual identity and your private emotional reality. And it produces exhaustion that you think is spiritual weakness. It's the cost of running two parallel versions of yourself simultaneously: the woman you believe yourself to be, and the woman who is quietly feeling everything that that version can't acknowledge. The thought is not the problem. Suppressing it is the problem. The emotional sophistication map helps you identify which pattern is driving the suppression, because it's not the same for every woman who presents this way. For some women leaders, the driver is fear: fear of being spiritually disqualified. Somewhere you absorb the belief that the presence of a difficult thought is evidence of insufficient faith. A woman who truly believed would not be feeling the feelings that you're feeling. So the thought gets buried because you don't want the evidence against yourself. For some women leaders, the driver is confusion between faith and emotional agreement. You believe you're supposed to agree with what God says, and you do believe it theologically, but the emotional experience is not caught up with your faith. And listen, we're allowed to be human. Rather than sitting with the gap honestly, you perform agreement because performing feels closer to faith than admitting that you're not all the way there yet. You have simply been managing your interior life the same way you manage your external reputation: with precision, with editing, with clear sense of what is acceptable at your level. The problem is that the interior doesn't respond to management the way the room does. What gets suppressed doesn't disappear, it operates in silence. The map tells you which of these patterns is yours. That's where the true work begins. The link is in the description. I want to talk to you about something that's a little bit personal, because this topic I can't speak about theoretically. There was a season in my life when I was feeling a significant amount of interior weight. I was doing what needed to be done. I was building, I was showing up, serving, leading. Externally, everything was moving as it was supposed to. But internally, I had a collection of thoughts and feelings that I was managing with the same discipline that I applied to everything else. I didn't feel that I was being honest. I simply had an efficient filtering system. What I recognized over time is what that filtering was actually costing me in my relationship with God. My prayer life felt a lot weaker than it used to. Even though I hadn't stopped praying, I prayed consistently, but I was praying with the edited version of myself. There were thoughts I hadn't approved for expression, and there were also not making it into my conversation with God. I was bringing him the composed version, the grateful version, the woman who had already worked through all of the difficult parts. The problem is that the difficult parts hadn't been worked through, they'd been managed. Management is not the same as resolution. And my leadership, my decisions, my ability to receive what I was asking for was being affected by the gap between what I was presenting in prayer and what I was actually feeling. Now, how this changed is I stopped bringing God the polished version and started bringing him actual content. The resentment I had toward a situation, the grief I had about what a certain season had required of me, and the ambivalence I hadn't admitted, even to myself, about some of the roles I had been faithfully filling in my life. What I found on the other side of my true expression, with honesty, wasn't anger or correction from God. It was clarity. The clarity that comes when you stop using spiritual language to suppress emotional reality and you start using spiritual practice, prayer, reading the Bible, the way it was designed to be, as the place where you bring everything. You don't hold back. Psalm 62:8 says, "Trust him at all times. Ye people, pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us." Pour out your heart, not the curated version, not the one that demonstrates adequate faith, your actual heart with actual contents. The instruction was never to arrive at God already composed. The instruction was to bring what you have, come as you are. Here is the reframe. A taboo thought is not evidence of failed faith. It's evidence of an interior life that has not yet had a safe place to land. If you spent years developing a skill of emotional precision with every external direction, in your leadership, in your communication, in the way you show up for your team, your organization, that's fine. You know how to process on the inside and present on the outside. That's a real skill, and it belongs at this level. What you may not have done is apply the same precision inward, not as management, as honest inquiry. The thought that feels incompatible with your spiritual identity is carrying information. Resentment is not a spiritual failure, it's a signal that something has been unrecognized for a long time. Because grief about your life is not being ungrateful, it's the acknowledgement of what things you have lost. And that's the beginning of honest stewardship, not the end of your faith. Ambivalence about a role you faithfully filled is not a betrayal to your career either. It's your interior telling you that something needs to be looked at, that you need to do an examination. And that examination is not a threat to what you believe. The audit is not a confession that your faith is insufficient somehow. The audit is the application of the same rigor you bring to external decisions, but you apply it inward to the emotional content you have been managing rather than examining. This is what becomes possible on the other side of it, a prayer life that is actually intact with what you're feeling. Decisions that are made from your full interior rather than from the compressed version of yourself. A relationship with God that is grounded in honesty rather than in your performance. You don't have a faith problem. You have a suppression built that has been protecting your identity at the cost of your clarity. The audit is how you begin to recover both. I have three movements. I call this the thought audit. It's not an examination of your beliefs, it's an inventory of what you've been managing so that you can stop managing it and start using it. Okay, so here's movement number one. Acknowledge the thought without a verdict. Identify one thought you've had in the last 30 days that you redirected before it could finish forming. It could have been about a person, about a decision, about your life and what it's cost you. It may feel incompatible with who you are right now. Write it down without editing it. Do not direct it toward gratitude either. And don't add a theological counterpoint. Let the thought be what it is. Let it be full and do this for the first time. The verdict comes later. The acknowledgement comes first. A thought you've not allowed to form can't be examined. A thought that you've not examined can't be resolved. And a thought you haven't resolved will continue to govern from that silence. Movement number two. Ask what the thought is actually saying. Every suppressed thought is a container. Under the resentment container, there's usually an unmet expectation that was never voiced. Under the grief, there's usually a true accounting of what a season has cost you that you've never done that before. Under ambivalence, there's usually a question about alignment that's been deferred because addressing it felt disruptive. Ask how the thoughts relate to an emotion and don't just justify a feeling. Your emotions impact your thinking impacts your behavior, and your behavior creates your environment. If the emotion never gets to deliver the information, the thinking never gets to use it, and the environment that you're creating is being shaped by content you haven't reviewed honestly. Movement three, bring the whole thing to prayer. Not the resolved version, not the version where you've already processed it and now you're reporting results. The unresolved version, the raw one. Bring the thought that made you feel like a spiritual fraud and bring it directly to the place it was always designed to go, to God. It's not a confrontation of your faith, it's activation of your faith. For the organizational leaders and L&D executives watching this because you're thinking about women in your senior roles inside of your culture, A leader who is running a managed interior alongside a public faith identity is giving you compliance, not clarity. She's not leading from her full capacity. She's leading from what's past her own interior inspection. That difference shows up in the quality of thinking, the depth of trust, and whether her leadership is sustainable. Picture the version of you after the audit. You didn't abandon your faith, you deepened it. You stopped bringing God, the edited version of yourself, and started bringing Him the actual one. That connection between your full interior one and the place where it was always designed to go, you found something that you've been missing. Access to the information your suppressed thoughts had been holding on to. Access to a prayer life that felt like it was in real contact with where you actually were. Your decisions shifted because you were finally making them from the whole of yourself rather than from part of yourself that had passed the review. Your leadership became quieter, more grounded. The composure you had always performed became a composure you actually had because there was nothing underneath it that was still being managed and unaddressed. The taboo thought didn't disqualify you from your relationship with God. It delivered you to the version of your faith that had been waiting for you to show up with everything you had. You are still the woman you were. You are more of her now. And that's all the audit ever was. This week, I want you to run the first movement of the thought audit. Identify one thought from the past 30 days that you didn't let finish. Write it down without the theological counterpart. And then add a scripture later on that answers that thought. But let it be what it is. Then ask, what am I feeling? Let it resonate for 2 to 3 minutes, not to validate it with the feeling, but just to receive the information. Then bring it to prayer, all of it, the unedited version. The examination of which suppression pattern is yours, what has been costing your leadership, and what interior clarity actually makes available to you. That is what Sophie was built for. Sophie is my proprietary emotional strategy AI designed specifically for women leaders. It is the space where you process the interior content that does not belong in a professional conversation but cannot stay in silence, where you examine what your suppressed thoughts have been feeling and where you get clear on what you actually need to do next. The link is in the description. And if you want to understand which pattern has been driving your suppression, whether it's fear of disqualification, the confusion between faith and emotional agreement, or the habit of interior management, the emotional sophistication map is the place to begin. You are not a spiritual fraud. You are a faithful woman who has been managing her interior with the same precision she brings to everything else, and who has not yet had to name for what that costs. The audit is not a threat to who you are. It's the beginning of being all of it. In the room, in prayer, and in the leadership that is waiting for the rest of you to show up. If this conversation is the kind that you want more of, subscribe. There's a new conversation every week. See you in the next one.